The name Rothschild walks into the room before you do. It comes with enormous history, quite a lot of gravitas, quite a lot of responsibility.
A member of one of the world's most influential banking dynasties, Dame Hannah Rothschild discusses her family's incredible history.
I think for them, a lot of it was actually just trying to make a better life for themselves.
Succession.
As people change, you have to adjust the legacy and you have to adjust the succession. We have a very complex series of businesses. I'm having to learn.
And giving back.
Listen, you're lucky enough to have this, you need to do that with it.
Recorded at Singapore's iconic Raffles Hotel as part of UOB's private bank event, Dame Hannah Rothschild joined me for a special edition of CNBC Meets. Dame Hannah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. What a great pleasure it is to be in Singapore for the first time.
Well, I'd like to start by talking about your family's incredible legacy. It goes way back to great, I'm not sure how many greats, but a lot of greats, grandfather Maya Amschel Rothschild, who, according to records, set up financial services business in Frankfurt as early as 1769. Can you tell me about him?
This is an extraordinary story. So he was born in a place called the Judengasse, which was a Jewish ghetto, basically. And it was the house that he lived in when he eventually had 13 children was only 14 feet wide. And he lived there with his very, very overpowering and dominant and an incredibly brilliant wife who was called Guttel. He was determined to get out of this ghetto. At nighttime, the ghetto was closed. You weren't allowed to leave. The street was so narrow that no sunlight could penetrate. There was no plumbing, there was no sewage, there was nothing. So everything you can imagine happened in this street. And unsurprisingly, he wanted to get out of there. And he started a small coin business, and that did reasonably well. But actually, and this is where it ties into legacy, his great strength was to send his 5 sons to the capitals of Europe at that time. And what they did is they set up, in effect, the first international banking system. So whereas everyone used to be in separate different countries or separate cities until then, these 5 boys communicated with each other, sometimes by pigeon, and they wrote to each other in Judendeutsche, which was a kind of Yiddish German vernacular. And that is why they were so successful. And this absolute belief in togetherness, you've got to stand together, you've got to work together, you've got to work across borders, you've got to work with rules. And by 1789, when the last one went, to 1815, so a very, very short period of time, it was said that no government or king would consider going to war without the Rothschilds supporting them, because that was how incredibly influential and powerful they had become.
Hannah, it's an extraordinary history, as you say, and the 5 sons. What in your mind, what was so significant within the family's history to build this kind of success?
A lot of it was actually just trying to make a better life for themselves. They were reviled at the time for being, for their faith, for being Jewish. They were reviled for being different. They kept up certain ways of living, which other people outside the Judengasse didn't want. They wanted more freedom. Later, as the family became wealthier and more sophisticated, they wanted other things. So they wanted all the accoutrements that came with wealth. So, for example, they would start buying works of art because they felt that was going to make them look better. They understood, actually, that business isn't just done in a boardroom. Business actually is done in a ballroom as well. Business is who you know, how you interact with people. So they then realized that they had to become more sophisticated. And they set about making themselves more sophisticated.
Can you pinpoint what you think were the key factors behind the success and the survival in the financial world?
The simple rule that bound the family was togetherness. Although they relied, and we still rely, to be very clear about this, on talented individuals, we also believe that there is a kind of code amongst a family of discretion, of thoughtfulness, which I think is a kind of principle. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's worked. So, for example, in our family bank, Rothschild and Co., which actually I'm also on the steering board of that. First female Rothschild, I might add, to be on that one. That's run by very talented individuals, know their stuff. But actually, my cousin Alexander took over from his father, David, who took over from his father, who took over from his father. And there is that kind of, you hand the baton on. And I think we were born to feel it was an incredible gift and an accident to be born with this privilege and where we are. But it is our responsibility to make the most of it. And I think that humility, if we can hang on to that, will keep us going a bit longer.
What does it mean to you, Hannah, to be the first woman?
I feel very, very proud. I feel that I worked hard for it, actually. It didn't just fall into my lap. I had to prove my worth, both inside the family and outside the family. So they trusted me enough to give me these roles. But I also feel nervous about messing it up. Not just because I'm a female or not just because I'm seventh generation, but because I feel a tremendous responsibility towards the institutions that I represent.
Your late father, Lord Jacob Rothschild, described the family spending the first part of the 19th century making lots of money and a lot of the second half spending it. Yeah. Describe the family's relationship with wealth at that time.
He loved that quote. You want to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And my forebears were no different. They'd spent basically half a century working unbelievably hard to build it up. They then got, I think it's fair to say, a little bit seduced by a better life, and I'm not going to blame anyone for wanting a more comfortable life. They did very well, and then they took their foot off the pedal, if you like. So I think what he really meant by that quote was, don't give up. You've got to stay disciplined. You've got to keep on it. And he himself worked every hour of every day right up until he died about 18 months ago, age 88. So he very much believed in that discipline.
Also, they built a number of notable properties. Talk me through the scale of that portfolio at the time.
Well, they built within a period of about 40 years, 44 very, very significantly large houses. And if any of you come to England, please visit Waddesdon Manor, one of the things in my portfolio, which is an extraordinary house. It was built in the 1880s, and it's a Victorian interpretation of a French Renaissance chateau. So try and imagine that. And then they filled it full of works of art that had belonged to famous families. So what they tried to do, I think, was to pay homage to other civilizations, other great families and businesses that have succeeded. And they put it all together in this amazing house. And that was just one house. So wherever you go in Europe, you will find these houses in different places. They were three-dimensional calling cards.
Hannah, when you were growing up, when did you become aware of the family success?
I think it is fair to say that the name Rothschild walks into the room before you do. It comes with enormous history, quite a lot of gravitas, quite a lot of responsibility. And so I was aware at quite a young age about that, that this name was there. And it was very much instilled in me that there was a responsibility that went with that. So, if you have privilege, which I did from an early age, I had the responsibility to look after that, not to take it for granted, not to waste it, but to try and do something with it. So from a very early age, we were involved in our family charities. So, we were constantly said, listen, you're lucky enough to have this, you need to do that with it.
Growing up within that family, I think age 9, you were saying that you had to learn terms that you weren't familiar with from the world of finance.
Well, it was very simple. If you wanted to stay out for dinner and not have dinner in the nursery, you had to learn to communicate with who was coming to dinner. So I remember one night we had a Japanese businessman came for dinner. And my father said, okay, I'm going to teach you the rudiments of the Japanese economic system. And he said, you are going to talk to this gentleman and you're going to ask him certain questions. You don't necessarily have to know the answers, but you need to look interested in what they are. And actually, that was a brilliant lesson, and I've used that ever since. As long as you show interest in other people, there's no such thing as a boring dinner or lunch, ever. That was one of the rules that my father taught me. I mean, we had an extraordinary upbringing in that he was a very, very cosmopolitan, cultured human being. He was obsessed by business. It was the first thing and the last thing he thought about. But actually, he had a lot of other people. So at dinner, there would be the dancer Nureyev, or the painter Lucian Freud, or the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, or, as I say, the Japanese businessman. And we were just taught, you go there and you go and talk to them and listen. I think that was the big thing.
Why do you think, Hannah, he was so well respected? Because he has been described as the most financially astute and influential of all the Rothschilds.
I think of his generation, that's absolutely true. Nathan, who was the founding father of the British branch, I think Jacob, if he were here now, would say actually he was probably the kind of behemoth in terms of our historic family, which is not to take anything away from my father at all, but the early Rothschilds invented the bond market, for example. That was quite a radical thing to do at that time. They thought, right, we think South Africa and diamonds are a good thing to interest in. We think the Suez Canal might well pay dividends eventually. There were many, many things that my forebears invested in or saw the potential of, which was extraordinary. Back to my father. I think that my father, he was an enormously brilliant backer of individuals. And I think he would say that his greatest legacy was being able to spot great, great individuals.
Well, in 1971, he founded Rothschild Investment Trust, which today operates as RIT Capital Partners. How significant was that, Hannah, do you think, in shaping the family's portfolio as it stands today?
Yeah. Well, he founded it while he was working at what was then known as NM Rothschild. RIT was started. It was an investment trust, which was a vehicle which was perfectly suited for that time when it was impossible to get toeholds in certain markets. So the investment trust enabled people who now could probably take their phones out and buy something directly or an ETF. You couldn't do that then. So it was an extraordinary market opening vehicle. A little bit later, he fell out with his cousin, and it led to him leaving Rothschild's bank. And that for him was a very cataclysmic moment personally and professionally, because he'd grown up within the family and suddenly he was basically turfed out of the family. So RIT became the vehicle that my little branch then managed, and I'm still on that board and I feel very, very strongly about it. But for my father, if you can use failure and you can use the impetus that comes from that, it propels you. And that's what RIT did. It propelled him into a whole new world.
Hannah, it must be hard for you. He only passed away, as you said, 18 months ago. Did you discuss any type of succession?
Look, I worked very closely with him for a very long time. So it was clear that the path that I was being groomed for. But my father played his cards very close to his chest. He didn't discuss his will, for example. He didn't discuss some of the minutiae of what he was going to do. So actually, when he passed, there were some revelations, let's put it that way. In my case, perfectly pleasant, but still quite shocking. So it was yes and no. It was a kind of preparation, but there was no clear, this is exactly what I expect of you. I've had to make a lot of what I'm doing up as I've gone along, actually.
Why did he choose you?
Well, put it this way, I didn't fall out of bed and get it. He was, my father was a very, very exacting boss. He worked unbelievably hard and he expected the same from people who worked with him, whether you were his daughter, his son, his grandchild, his colleague, whatever. I am so lucky to have spent so much time with him. But, it was not for the faint-hearted. And I think perhaps he chose me because he saw something in me that was determined. He saw something in me that was ambitious. He saw something in me that was dutiful, and I am dutiful. And he knew that up to the best of my ability, I wouldn't mess it up. Doesn't mean I don't mess it up or I won't, but he knew that I would do everything to try not to do that.
Was it hard to take on these responsibilities as well as grieving your father? And what were the priorities for you?
It's a great question, and you know when he passed, I didn't feel that he'd left the room because I was still doing essentially what we'd already done together. I was still running the foundations and involved with the businesses. So in some respects, I felt that he was still here. A year after he passed, I was hit by a wave of grief and the realization of what had happened. But it honestly, maybe it was a good thing. Maybe the year of kind of not really thinking. So actually, I think in the last 6 months, I have had to grow up a lot in some respects. I'm already pretty old, but I have to grow up a lot. I've had to really think much more carefully about my legacy, about how to manage succession, about how we look at some of these businesses differently. In his case, he was very much a top-down, I think you called it the emperor. He was in control of every single aspect. And we have a very complex series of businesses, from farms to, wine businesses to banks. So I think it's in the last 6 months, it's hit me that the importance of governance, the importance of rules, and all these things, incidentally, which I wasn't trained to do, I'm having to learn.
Talk us through some of those different roles now, Hannah. You're chair of the Rothschild Foundation. What's its mission?
So the Rothschild Foundation is a UK-based foundation, and its principal three missions are art and culture, and then small society, of course, that would be local, and then the environment. And we do other things, but those are our three core purposes in the UK. And it's interesting because we have one also based in Europe that helps to preserve Jewish culture in Europe. And it's a lot of it is about archive, it's about libraries, it's about synagogues. It's much smaller. And then the biggest foundation we have, which was set up by another forebear, Edmund de Rothschild, 140 years ago. So it's the oldest one in Palestine. That one, because Israel is still a comparatively young country, that one has, it's firstly, and this is terribly important for us as a family, it is for all the citizens of Israel. Because it was set up before Israel itself was created, when my forebears set it up, we set it up for everybody, regardless of their religion, of their creed, their lack of religion, their profession. And that informs everything that we do. And there, the main focus of our attention is on education across the board. But we've also built and supported many, many, many important institutions. So what we're trying to do there is embed a better future for all people in that country. In England, of course, it's a much older country. So what we tend to support are existing charities and existing organizations because they're much more embedded into society.
What kind of leader are you?
I hope that I'm reasonably collegiate. I am collegiate. I talk to people, I listen to them. I'm lucky they're very good. Ultimately, a leader, unfortunately, you've got to make decisions. I mean, I think that's what separates a leader from a non-leader. You've got to make a decision sometimes, and you have to accept sometimes they're not the best, but you try your very hardest. So, but I do realize that leading is about decision making. And when my father was alive, quite often I didn't have to. I could kind of defer. And then suddenly it's like, okay, so the buck stops with me, and I have to take the criticism, I have to take the praise, I have to take the risk, and I don't always get it right. I'm learning hugely every day.
Away from the family's many organisations, Dame Hannah Rothschild has also built her own career as an author and filmmaker. Hannah, what took you down that path? Because it was almost like you were saying, I'm going to step away from the family legacy for a little bit to pursue my path.
My father didn't make it obvious about who his successor was going to be. And certainly when I was younger, it was, I'd say, even less obvious. And I wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to work at the BBC, where I did indeed work for 15 years. I wanted to write. He wasn't particularly encouraging, but he didn't stop me in any way. I also wanted to earn my own living, and that was very important to me at that age. I didn't earn a lot of money, I have to say, but I did earn my own living. And now, of course, we realize that actually it was incredibly good, because the power of storytelling for everyone. And I look around the room, whether you're working in business, whether you're working in climate, wherever you are, the ability to articulate a story about what you're doing and why it matters is fantastically important. So when I eventually came back into the business, he was like, right, about time. I think he could also see that actually that I had learned a few interesting things.
What's the most challenging aspect, you think, of running family organizations, succession planning, and managing a legacy?
Well, it's obviously the family, isn't it? I mean, it's no, seriously. I mean, I think it's about sensitivities. It's about, you think because you're part of a family, you understand what your family members are thinking. But of course you don't, because actually everybody has, my sister might say that's blue and I might say that's purple or that's green. Everybody has a very different way of looking at things. And I think to try and be sensitive to how differently they might see a situation is, for me, it's a constant readjustment. Legacy and succession, and that's really, what we're talking about. I think that is work in progress. And I think that as people change, you have to adjust the legacy and you have to adjust the succession. I think you have to bring people on very early. So you've got to educate the next generation. If you want them to take over, it's absolutely incumbent on us, that I'm now the most senior person in my group, to educate them and to make them feel that they are part of it, that they have a role to play, to listen to them, to encourage them, to love them through it, actually. You've got to. And that, I think, is your building block. Do I have the answers? Absolutely not. Am I trying? Yep, I am trying. But, I hope we look at the 8th generation in my family and the 9th generation. I hope we don't become like some other families where actually the name survives, but none of the actors do. I'd love to feel that my great-granddaughter might be sitting here and sharing her experience with you, or grandson for that matter. I haven't got one yet, by the way, but I'm working on it.
As you say, your family has an incredible legacy which spans generations. What is your number one piece of advice to those family businesses or family offices who may be navigating their own succession planning?
Openness and communication. And there are very difficult conversations and there are feelings that you have to navigate. But if somehow you can say, I'm doing this, I'm sorry if you don't like it, or I'm delighted if you do like it, but this is why I'm doing it, and you can explain, I think that that is an important way forward.
What was the best piece of advice your father gave you?
Well, you know something, one of the things that he told me, which he said, always put your hat in the ring. Now, I don't know if that translates very easily, but basically I think what he means is give it a go. Just turn up, do your best, put your hat in the ring. And my grandmother had a slightly different way of putting it. She'd go, if you throw your heart over the fence, your horse will jump after it. And again, it's a kind of slightly the same thing, isn't it? So I think have a go, really.
What are your hopes for the Rothschild legacy going forward?
My hopes for the Rothschild legacy is that we continue to use our tremendous privilege, the money we've made, the good name that we've fostered to help other people, way beyond our own family. That's what I'd love.
Dame Hannah Rothschild, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Sponsored by UOB Private Bank.